This is World of Africa on WION World is One. Welcome to the show with me, Eric Njoka. Africa. This one word is sufficient to evoke images of a doomed people. Africa's population is largely ill-insured against external shocks brought about by natural disasters, adverse climate, war, and even conflict. There are many who are offended when the media reports that the region is plagued by many problems which hurt its ability to ensure food and nutrition security for its people. The situation seems to repeat itself year in, year out. But we are not here to talk about what we already know. In reality, the continent continues to suffer immensely, yet the West or aid organizations haven't stopped pledging funds, each disaster with its own share or promise. It has become too obvious nowadays. However, where does all the money go? We believe it is time for Africans to get the answers to this pertinent question. Watch this next special report and know why we insist Africa must wake and stand up now.
It's been 3 months since the year 2023 began, but there's nothing new about the worsening climate change and its impact on humans. In fact, it's getting worse. After battering Madagascar in late February, Cyclone Freddy wreaked havoc in Malawi and Mozambique when it made a second landfall within weeks. Locals, officials and aid workers continue to uncover the full extent of destruction in what may be the longest-lasting tropical cyclone on record. In Malawi, the death toll crossed over 500, with close to 400,000 people still displaced. Before Freddy, Malawi experienced its deadliest cholera outbreak. It is feared that floodwaters could worsen the situation in terms of accessing clean water and sanitation. In Mozambique, at least 66 died and nearly 59,000 were displaced. Those who survived the fury now face another danger: lack of food. The United Nations has continuously deplored the effects of climate change. It predicts that the worst is yet to come.
Humanity is on thin ice, and that ice is melting fast. As today's report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, details, humans are responsible for virtually all global heating over the last 200 years. The rate of temperature rise in the last half-century is the highest in 2,000 years. Concentrations of carbon dioxide are at their highest in at least 2 million years. The climate time bomb is ticking.
The Horn of Africa is bearing the brunt of record drought for years. The situation is not getting any better, as 43,000 people were killed in Somalia last year, half of them children under 5.
People became weak because of hunger, so we had to flee for our lives. I came to this camp in Baidoa during the month of Ramadan. My wife died of hunger here, and I became helpless. All my livestock and crops were also wiped out.
Across Africa, from east to west, people are experiencing a food crisis that is bigger and more complex than the continent has ever seen. According to data from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, 1 in 5 Africans, a record 278 million, were already facing hunger or famine in 2021. It says the situation has worsened. East Africa has missed 4 consecutive rainy seasons, the worst drought in 40 years. Nearly 22 million people across Ethiopia, Kenya and Somalia face high levels of acute food insecurity, a number projected to rise up to 26 million by mid-2023 if the rains fail again. In Chad, over 19,000 head of livestock was swept away as floods ravaged the country. In neighboring Nigeria, flooding hit 29 of the 36 states by the end of last year. The rains continue to pour this year. More countries in the west and east are experiencing a change in the weather patterns. This deluge has cut off supplies of food to remote regions. Then there is conflict, which has long been a driver of hunger. War forces civilians from their homes, livelihoods, farms and food sources. It also makes it dangerous to deliver assistance. The number of displaced people in Africa has tripled over the past decade to a record 36 million in 2022, according to UN data that represents almost half of the displaced people in the world. Most were displaced internally within their own countries by conflict. According to the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, a crisis monitoring group, conflicts are worsening across the continent.
We want to bear witness in the face of a situation which is intolerable, which is not acceptable. What is happening here in Eastern Congo is unacceptable. What is happening in Eastern Congo must be brought to light. This is the reason for our presence here. This is the reason for this humanitarian airdrop. This is the reason for our diplomatic and political investment that accompanies this humanitarian bridge.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February last year, which Moscow called a special military operation, added to Africa's problems. All the global bodies, including the UN, WHO and EU, moved their focus to the war and neglected Africa's woes. Disruptions caused by that war also resulted in fertilizer shortage. Where stocks are available, prices have risen beyond the means of many farmers. The result will be smaller harvests this year in West Africa. The World Food Programme estimates cereal production could fall by 20%. 4 of the 5 African countries receiving the most humanitarian funding under the 2022 aid appeal are located in or border the drought-stricken Horn of Africa region. The US announced billions of dollars in additional humanitarian assistance to address acute food insecurity in Africa. The country pledged an additional $2.5 billion in emergency assistance and medium to long-term food security assistance. The United Nations followed suit and made a similar pledge at the 36th African Union Summit in Ethiopia last year.
Around the world today, 339 million people are in need of humanitarian aid, an increase of more than 25% since last year. And so today, here in Addis, I'm announcing the largest ever allocation from our United Nations Central Emergency Response Fund, $250 million, to combat famine and to address unfunded emergencies.
Though many critics still question the disbursement of these funds, African governments have done little to prevent food crises from recurring. In a move to boost production, reduce import reliance and improve food security, leaders in 2003 pledged to commit at least 10% of their national budgets to agriculture and rural development within 5 years. By 2021, nearly 2 decades later, just 2 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, Mali and Zimbabwe, met that target. Agriculture makes up nearly 20% of Africa's GDP, and more than half of Africans work in the sector. Most of this is low productivity subsistence farming, and the region is a net importer of staples including wheat, palm oil and rice. Productivity and crop yields have increased, but agricultural production per capita is falling. Self-sufficiency for major commodities is decreasing. Without action, the World Bank says Africa's food import bill, which stood at $43 billion in 2019, could rise to $110 billion in 2025. Africa's woes seem to be far from over, and the deplorable famine disaster persists. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
At least 500,000 people remain in displacement camps in Darfur, 2 decades after a bloody conflict broke out between the Arab-dominated Sudanese government and rebel groups. For many among the displaced, there is no home to return to. Some have had their villages burned to the ground. Others say their homes are now occupied by Arab tribes. Doctors who have lived with the communities in West Darfur are piecing together the broken clinics and hospitals in an area known as Krenik and instilling hope to millions. Here's their story.
These scenes rocked Khartoum for months. Angry with their leaders, the Sudanese went out on the streets daily since the ouster of Omar al-Bashir in 2019. Sudan has been ungovernable since then. The country has been steeped in chaos after a military coup led by the country's top general Abdel Fattah al-Burhan in October 2021. The coup resulted in the removal of a Western-backed government, appending its short-lived transition to democracy. This is West Darfur. In April last year, at least 200 people were killed in fighting between Arabs and non-Arabs at this area known as Krenik. The clashes first erupted with the killing of 2 people by an unknown assailant in Krenik, about 30 kilometers east of Janina, the provincial capital of West Darfur. Emily Wambugu, a project medical referent for Médecins Sans Frontières or Doctors Without Borders, narrated the harrowing ordeal, how the hospital was ruined, 2 hospital staff and 8 patients killed, and the hospital pharmacy looted.
On the 25th, it was the heaviest day with a lot of shooting around that started from 6:45 a.m. And then most of the mothers that had come back decided to leave the hospital, and there was no option because also all the staff also ran away for their life. And the only people that were left in the hospital were 4 mothers where the children were on oxygen. As it was reported, they decided to stay in the hospital, and whatever will happen, they will not remove their children again from the oxygen.
Soon after the horrific incident, MSF moved back to West Darfur in December 2022. MSF provided humanitarian assistance and healthcare services to both internally displaced and local communities. They ran fixed and mobile clinics in and around El Janina town and supported the El Janina Teaching Hospital and the main healthcare facility in Krenik town before it was destroyed. Dr. Prince Matthew, who was MSF's project coordinator at the time and recently coordinated and executed the rebuilding process, spoke to WION.
So one of the first things that we did was really focus on community engagement to negotiate safe access on the road between Janina and Krenik. We directly engaged with the communities that live alongside that road, meeting with youth groups, elders, women. We also negotiated directly with all of the armed groups in the area to explain our neutrality and our intention to start activities in Krenik and to support the hospital in Krenik and provide free quality healthcare. That is without any discrimination. We do not ask our patients their race, their gender, their political affiliations, or their ethnicity. Anyone who comes to our clinics are treated free of cost with no other discrimination.
Many people live in densely populated displacement camps surrounding the hospital. Public spaces and schools are now filled with hundreds of tents and makeshift shelters. The only water supply is by donkey carts.
So this is also the reason why we started doing some of these mobile clinics, because we realized that if you're a pregnant woman, rather than take a 4-hour donkey cart journey to the hospital that we function in many of these cases, it is important that we bring healthcare closer to the areas that our communities live in. And this is how we started to do mobile clinics, focusing on the nomadic communities that are resident 20, 30 kilometers outside of Krenik so that we can bring healthcare to them.
On the 22nd of January, the hospital picked up, reopening the emergency room, where injuries related to accidents, gunshot wounds or violent incidents can be treated around the clock. A maternity ward was also set up to take care of the newborns. But even with Krenik picking up the pieces, there is a lot at stake.
It's becoming more and more difficult to get funding for humanitarian healthcare, but it's also becoming more difficult to implement healthcare programs in the country. And this is where we need the government and the others to realize the importance of life-saving medical care that is neutral and impartial, because violence affects everyone, and it is our responsibility to do the best that we can to save lives in this country.
Sudan is undergoing a transition. Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, who seized power in a 2021 coup, called on troops to end support for authoritarian leaders as talks begin on military reforms, part of a prolonged transition to civilian rule. Many humanitarian organizations, including the MSF, are hoping that with all that is happening in the capital, more emphasis will be placed on the security of people living in volatile regions like Darfur. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Non-government organizations say giving limbs to child amputees will greatly reduce the stigma they face in society. A foundation in Nigeria has taken it upon themselves to offer free prosthetic limbs to not only children, but hundreds who cannot afford them. Our correspondent Louisa Olaniyi has sent us this report.
The number of amputees in Nigeria is increasing. Car, motorcycle accidents and illnesses like diabetes, neuropathy is among the many causes. An artificial limb that costs around 4 lakh nairas makes it unaffordable for many in need.
One thing we are trying to do is, there are many hospitals around us in different states that we are trying to come into partnership with how we can see how we can bring in what we do to their clinic or to their hospital and make sure we don't have that huge number of patients.
The government to keep on creating charity homes like this, because it really goes a long way. Imagine me trying to start up doing something to raise 1 million naira. No, it's not easy. So I will advise the government to create organizations and support NGOs like this, so in order for them to continue the good work.
In a bid to address this issue, an NGO has embarked on a legacy project aimed at touching the lives of amputees. The project is providing free artificial limbs to 5,000 needy amputees.
First of all, if anybody come with their problem, they have limb problem. But first thing is underprivileged. Second thing is, maybe you are a big man, but you are not satisfied with 4 million, 5 million limb. So you can come and check with us. We will support. Anybody can come and check our limb, and it is free of cost for everybody.
Well, I am associated with this project for almost last over 14 years. The people who have lost their limbs, maybe in accident or due to infection or a cancer or diabetes, they become dependent on the society. They become dependent on the family. They cannot do their day-to-day activities. When you fix the limb, they become independent. They can do their daily activities, and then they are not burden on the society.
Nigeria has 30 million persons with disabilities. Experts say most of the limb amputations are preventable through public awareness and good healthcare policies. They call for more public-private partnership to address the issue.
This is the flagship project, one that is so dear to us. And as you can see, the tagline is, or rather the motto is, born to create a legacy. Many times we extend a hand of friendship. I would not call it charity. A hand of friendship, a hand of assistance to those who need. But an artificial limb is something that's going to remain forever.
We have about 300 people, and I invited them to come to our campus to do a health checkup through KKF for our employees. And then we have a CSR projects which we want to do for Igbesa community. So I invited them to come to that Igbesa community hall and study what are the issues there in terms of mainly for the health.
Over 1 billion people in the world live with some disability. Globally, 65 million people live with limb amputations. 1.5 million people undergo amputation every year.
Living with one form of deformity or disability, especially in a fast-moving world of today, can be daunting. Thanks to innovation, persons in this category, especially amputees, can now enjoy a new lease of life. But with the present economic situation, especially in a country like Nigeria, acquiring such technology does not come cheap. Hence the call for more public-private partnership at addressing these needs, especially for low-income earners, as becoming very paramount. From Lagos, Nigeria, Louisa Olaniyi, WION, World is One.
The Rwandan Ministry of Infrastructure has launched the construction of new homes meant to accommodate migrants deported from the United Kingdom. The housing development project for 528 housing units, supposed to take 6 months, will be implemented under the UK-Rwanda Migration Partnership. The UK reached a deal with Rwanda in April last year, under which illegal immigrants and asylum seekers are to be sent to the East African country to have their claims processed there. Here's a report from Kigali.
Men and women are busy at work in capital Kigali. Rwanda continues to build houses that, according to the agreements signed in 2022, will accommodate asylum seekers who have been deported from the UK.
So basically the houses are meant to be for Rwandans, targeting the low-income earners, those who don't have land, who don't have houses. They'll be the first to own these houses. That's the basis of us being here.
British Interior Minister Suella Braverman, who was on a tour to Rwanda recently, defended the controversial plan to deport asylum seekers. Braverman and Rwandan Foreign Minister Vincent Biruta say the UK-Rwanda partnership could become a model for other countries.
We saw at the end of last year people dying on the Channel in their ill-fated attempt to get to the UK. So the compassionate thing to do and the humanitarian thing to do is find another solution. And that's why I believe, just as the Minister has just said, that there is a real opportunity here to resettle people in safe and secure environments where they can lead a prosperous and healthy life.
What we want to do is to create an innovative solution to be able to offer to these asylum seekers and migrants alike safety, security, and opportunities for them to live a decent life.
But UK's Interior Minister has been under immense criticism. She has faced the wrath in Parliament and the world over for her approach to the matter. A photograph of Braverman laughing at the sight of a housing estate under construction for asylum seekers triggered a meme photoshopped into others of Nazi death camps from World War II. The original photo of Braverman was cropped, while a wider shot showed her laughing along with two Rwandan people. More than 45,000 migrants arrived on the shores of southeast England on small boats in 2022, a 60% annual increase on a perilous route that has been used by more people every year since 2018. UK government, which is trailing in opinion polls, has been striving for years to tackle the crossings. It had hoped the threat of a one-way ticket to Rwanda would deter the cross-channel journeys. The Rwandan government is optimistic about the move.
Mixing Rwandans and migrants is a good thing because it will help Rwandans to live in places that are, I would say, modern. It will also allow migrants to be easily integrated into the Rwandan community. As we said, we don't want to make migrant camps apart and Rwandans living on the other side.
Phase 1 of the project is supposed to end in June with 240 units. After that, Hibweza Riverside Homes, which is the agency overseeing the construction, will aim to complete the whole project of 2,400 units. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
That's our time this week on World of Africa. Talk to us on all our social media platforms. Your feedback is highly appreciated. Until next week, thanks for watching. I'm Eric Njoka, and goodbye.